Hey, it's Chris. What are we talking about today? Euthia, Torment of Resurrection. Things I like about it, things I don't like about it, things you should know if you're interested in it. Third crowdfunding campaign is here. What do you need to know? Make the right decision for you. My thoughts, my impressions, my ideas on it. Hoo boy, elephant in the room, right? Literally. Let's go. Okay, maybe not literally. You know what I mean. This box right now has a massive amount of tokens and chits and cardboard everythings, right? And so you're going, okay, Chris, how on earth am I going to manage this game? This is a 3-booklet game, right? Voidfall, anyone? So, what do you need to know? Because this game, I'll make the argument right here at the beginning. This game makes me start to question whether or not games, video game, board game side of things, have gone into the realm of just too much customization, right? Where is that line of this is enough and this is too much? Because on our hobby, we look at this and we go, what do you mean it doesn't have replayability ad nauseum to the moon 67 million different ways, right? What do you mean this is only, 17 different decks of cards over here that I'm going to be managing? And the, 400,000 pieces of cardboard that you're going to be punching out. By the way, it's 38 boards of cardboard just for the base game. And then you throw on miniatures and you throw on dice and player boards and asymmetric Diablo-esque equipment and action tokens galore, gold that you're keeping track of, equipment, ability upgrades, unlocks, hex-based exploration as you move towards the outer edge. You just flip them up and, see what's there and align it so it fits up nicely with where you're going. And you play only a certain number of rounds. Oh my gosh, you have to play a certain number of rounds. Oh, good gracious, Chris. How long is that going to take? However, this game, truth be told, skirts that line very finely. What do I mean? Well, I wasn't expecting to say this when I got this game, right? I've talked about lifestyle games. Games that enrapture us. Games that table hog. Games that require repeated plays from an overhead standpoint, from a learning curve standpoint, as well as is it worthwhile for me to play this, a couple times a year standpoint. So where does Euthia fall on this scale of things? Now, Steamforged sent me this, and I said, oh boy, what have I bitten off, right? More than I can chew. But the nicest thing about this game, right? This 40-page rulebook, these player sheets that tell you all of this stuff, right? The absolute massive mother of symbology that goes along with this. It's overwhelming. It makes you feel anxious just unboxing it. I wasn't kidding about the 38 layers of punchboard cardboard to undo, right? At the same time, when I pull this up, when I read through this rule book, right? 39 pages down there, flipping through the examples and page after page of chits and tokens and explanations and everything along those lines, it doesn't fall into the trap of, wow, there's a lot, and wow, it's complex. And again, let me define complexity here. Complexity in the sense of I'm having to remember rules minutia for stuff that isn't intuitive or making sense, because that is probably the biggest cardinal sin of crowdfunding nowadays, if you're like me. You look at games and you go, boy, howdy, is this overly wrought and complex, and do we really need all of these things? Again, going back to the point at the beginning about where's that line of customization. Games like Lords of Ragnarok, games like Etherfields, those elements of things where you're just going, it's so extensive, it's just sheer extensiveness for the sake of extensiveness, or ostentatious sort of things, if you will. And that was my fear with this, right? Because I looked at this and I said, is this another big box crowdfunded game that is just, we can do it, so we're gonna do it, Chris. Ha ha! Diablo-esque, video game portability-esque, upgradableness of all of your armor icons and the matching sets and the gathering and the mining and the trading and the hex-based exploration, open world narrative, non-Mage Knight, where it's a deck builder, but this is a, free range, open, do whatever you want in whatever direction you want, and you're only constrained by time. It achieves that in massive success. I don't say that lightly, because I ultimately also would have trouble recommending this game to a lot of people, because this is also the penultimate game of, I love the idea of this game, but the practicality of it makes it this is a freaking sweet, awesome game, Chris. Awesome, all-time game for someone else to own, right? And its extensiveness, its expansiveness, its replayability, I'll make the argument, is just overwhelmingly impressive. The reputation that you're scoring based on a turn-by-turn system. The fact that every turn, as you're moving your character from hex to hex, fighting beasts, fighting animals, exploring your, chapter 1s, your chapter 2 tiles as you go along, your 3s, your 4s, your 5s, adding elements of elite minions or griffins or frickin' elementals that change the dynamic of the very hexes that they're touching, is utterly what you would expect out of a video game done to a tabletop port. And it's done in an overwhelmingly positive manner. Treasures, lakes, portals, caves, chapels, all of these things are encompassed by a massively sprawling 14 types of different encounters on unique, unknown places that you're slowly exploring and gathering this equipment from, doing bounties and, trading in pelts of animals slain. It takes the combat system of 3 actions that you are taking on a turn-by-turn basis of your combat, your merchant, your trading, your mining, and just taking them to the full extent is this: you take those 3 actions and you take your free actions and you're done. You move around and you do what you need to do. You keep track of it. You dice roll. And so, the biggest point I'll say is this game is an absolute fantastic game. Point number 1. The combination of mechanical approach, as I drop dice, who does that in a video, just is smooth. It is intuitive, because there is nothing more frustrating than a big box game like this where it feels disjointed, there are pieces missing or jagged edges that do not seem to fit, or elements that just seem out of place. The biggest boon, though, is also its biggest curse. Setup and teardown, like anything with this size, a la your Voidfalls, your Castles of Burgundies, deluxeified, gigantic, enormous monstrosities, is not without consideration. Because you also need a table much bigger than the one I have in front of me of a 3x3 for any lengthy scenario-based system that you're going to be setting up, right? I mean, this might be 2 rounds worth of hexes you've got sitting out there, essentially. And it's just going to be a sprawling game, because I did not show you the token after token after token after token bags, because there are just probably 5 more in there that encompass this, right? The box is messy, second only to my Frosthaven box in terms of whoa. And so therein lies, again, the question at the beginning, right? When you have all of these things, how much do you need? It's going to satiate you replayability monsters. There's no shortage of replayability, which then I guess ultimately begs the question, do you need an expansion content? No. You need expansion content for variability in terms of the players, or maybe slight nuances of the monster. But this will last you dozens of plays, probably alone by itself. Just with the scenario-driven booklet that they're giving you to adapt, to modify, to tweak things because of the core game experience. Point number 2, This is not a dynamic strategy game. This is where we start to diverge from your mage knights, right? With the similar exploration, with the similar overarching overview, but the dynamically different how you're going about it in both a limited way in both senses, but now being heavily driven by, as I mentioned, right, the dice. How the dice roll, and how this becomes also a player versus environment game that is going to potentially break it for a lot of people in that way. Because this is a reputation-based victory game, the dice, when you are battling monsters as your main fun point of this game, with your equipment and your mitigation and your, mitigation galore, essentially, with your GAR tokens and your special combat die to mitigate, with She's intervention here. What you're doing is you're rolling. You're just rolling and seeing what numbers you get, and then summing those up and saying, this is what I do to you, but you have a, reduced damage for whatever, and then the monster rolls, and then your opponent says, well, this is what I do to you back. And again, that sounds very straightforward, only it actually matters who your opponent may be, especially at the higher player counts, because if you're beating that player, then they may play a little more aggressively, because you also have these combat cards that are going to be mitigatable or usable during other people's turns in order to either behoove your monster or to potentially do some take that against the die rolls of your opponent. And those GAR tokens that I mentioned that are all important also allow you to not only change the die or reroll your own dice, but potentially your monster's die as well. And so if you're feeling like this person isn't a threat to me, am I going to be as aggressive about rerolling the monster stuff in order to do more damage to try and knock out the person? Because although this game does not eliminate you with a death, it does, torment you with a resurrection of basically losing, a good portion of your turn, if not more. It doesn't, cripple you by any means, but it definitely isn't without penalty either. And so how take that your player dynamic is at the table, how cutthroat in that sense, may determine how much enjoyment you get out of a very tactically but also luck-driven combat system, which, as I hear with a lot of dungeon crawlers, is the turnoff. Does it fit thematically? Frickin' yes! But it's not going to be an enjoyment for those looking for something else with more complete control. Again, similarly with the hex-based system, I personally love the randomization that comes with this. The exploration system, when you start exploring these, 2 hexes, the stuff starts to get more powerful. The monsters, as indicated by the swords behind the little wolf things right there, well, they jump up in creep in terms of difficulty. So if you're not ready, folks, you're not ready. And so you don't want them coming out too soon, because that's the only way you're going to be able to go to some of these explorative places or unlocks or whatever else you may need on that hex in the first place. Not only get the bonus that you're going for, but in order to do some of those other actions in the first place. The easy part is the action system, the smoothness of this that I mentioned. It is very intuitive once you have it ingrained. And I love that. The depth of the gameplay comes from how you're choosing to go about getting the reputation, what you're mining, what you're choosing for a resource of the dynamics offerings that are given to you on those various hex tiles all the time. Are you going for the gold and the reputation? Are you going for the items that are going to behoove you in the long run or the short run for the immediate success of the next round? But therein lies the next point that I have to bring up. You can play this cooperatively, you can play this solo, you can play it competitively. You're going to want to play it at one of those more than the others. Again, not because any of them are bad. I actually like this game because it doesn't veer the departure of the game flow and the mechanistic approach at those different play styles, and it gives you the engagement on a turn-by-turn basis of doing cool stuff. The doing cool stuff factor is a huge thing on board games for me now, right? Like, I don't want turns that are subpar. I want cool things all the time. And so at higher player counts, it's just going to take a lot longer to do those cool things. And because there are so many open world options for you, analysis paralysis from an Ameritrash game is a potential risk with this one, because you have just so much on the board with this iconography that you can see even on just the lower level tiles right here. And so it's going to be a dilemma for those that are struck by that, or especially at the higher player counts, just to get back around to you on a turn-by-turn basis. That's nothing new. That's nothing dynamically different than any other game like this, but it bears needing said. Truth be told, if I had someone to more regularly play this game with, I would probably play it cooperatively. Just because it gives me elements more of a Dead of Winter, if you will, right? Sometimes when you just get rid of the element of I may or may not backstab you, even though, you know, I probably won't, it just eases some tension at the table. The game flows easier, it flows smoother, and I just find myself having more fun. And this game is full of the fun factor. You know, when we talk about games today, sometimes what makes a game for me, or what breaks a game for other people, right? It's not that the mechanisms don't work. It's not that the mechanisms are bad. It's not that it's not a good game overall, right? The problem we have nowadays is that there are too many good games. So what ultimately determines that is the it factor, the fun factor, the fun it factor. And this game has it in spades. This game has it in spades. But it's a price point barrier to entry, right? Because at the same time, I don't think you could offer a reduced experience of this and get quite the same fulfillment or enjoyment, sort of like what we've seen with a few other iterations along Age of Innovations and your Terra Mysticas, if you will, where they try and sort of slim it down, Terra Nova style, and you don't quite get the full element of things. And so that's the dilemma, is can you distill this down any further? The answer is yes, but it's not going to distill it to the same degree of experience, because let's be clear, this is an experience-based game. There is nothing completely unique. There is nothing tremendously dynamically different in this game, but it puts the pieces you're familiar with in the move my guy around on a hex, take my little action token and spend it, and just brings joy out of it. And that's what you want out of a board game, right? The customizability of a video game, the adaptability of a video game in a tabletop. But also the barrier to entry is just, you know, the looming elephant in the room that I said of this, right? This is one of those instances where you almost just, the nagging wonder of, what if we could have just done this with an app, right? And I say that very loosely as someone who doesn't necessarily hugely enjoy it. I love the tactical feel of this, right? But the setup and tear down, the sorting, the organization of all of this, at some point when you are time constrained, becomes a burden rather than a cross I always want to bear. But for all of the scary pieces and the scary conversations and the huge overhead, right? This game is sort of like a gentle giant, if you will. It's massive, it's sprawling. There's so many elements of things, but it's not hard to learn. I learned it, right? I'm a self-proclaimed poor learner, poor player, if you will. But I didn't have any trouble. And so therein lies more of the dilemma. If it's not a price, if it's not a this is hard to learn, it's a can you justify getting it to the table as infrequently as you may, given the context of things? Because I'd also make the argument that once you play it, once isn't going to be enough. But will you have enough to play it to make it also worthwhile from a price point standpoint down the line? I can't speak to the expansion content. I don't know what's in it. But if you never had any of the expansion content, if you didn't know there was expansion content, you would be very happy with just this in our repeated play challenged society and hobby that we are now. So final thoughts on this. This truly is the most accessible role-playing tabletop board game that I have probably played because of the adaptability at player counts, because of the flexibility of the system. It doesn't eliminate the overhead or the setup teardown of any of those others, your Frosthavens, your Midaras, your Dungeon Universalises, but the ease of access comparatively to all of those is also just a lot lower in terms of being able to get into it. And ultimately, I think that's what separates it out from a lot of its predecessors, compatriots, contemporaries, because it just allows you to play it. And so if you're looking at all things equal on those aspects, this has to start to rise to the top if you're, again, okay with the randomness that comes from the open world exploration, the dice-based combat, and the potential take that the enemy combat controlled situations are going to present to you, with a little bit of analysis paralysis potential, with the just sheer options available at your fingertips. So that's either going to be overwhelmingly paralyzing, or it is going to be absolutely ecstatically enjoyable. So, Euthia, in a nutshell. There you go. It's on crowdfunding. Go check it out. Is it for you? Well, go see. You know what? If you want to get a true tasting of the flow, go watch Paul Grogan's playthrough video. The man does excellent work, and it'll help you figure out whether or not this is the dynamic of a type of game you're looking for, especially with the non-deterministic style comparatively to other things out there, or the overhead as well. That's all I got. Euthia. Torment. In some ways. Torment of fun. That's all I got. Stay classy. Have a great freaking day. Subscribe? Question mark? It's more like a long form essay rather than like your typical review, right? Sometimes you just got to do that and just talk. Let people know how you feel. Because I can't explain a 40-page rulebook to you in a couple minutes, but I can tell you what the game does here. And that's what matters most, right? How do you feel about it? Let me know. Peace out. See you around.